We've got some good news and we've got some bad news. Amarius Mims is going to miss a few weeks, but the guys that played well on Saturday are earning more opportunities in practice. We'll get into all of that today.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Thanks to all of you out there who make us your first listen and all the everydayers. Shout out to the regulars. If you're new to the show, you can subscribe on YouTube and everywhere else you get your podcast. Shout out to all the new subscribers on YouTube. We've seen a little spike, unsurprisingly, with Bengals football back. Today, we're going to catch you up on roster battles and how those are shaping up in practice after preseason game one. And unfortunately, we have to delay that conversation because Zach Taylor told us that Amarius Mims has a pec strain. He called it minor. He called it not very severe. Used the word several, read a definition out of the dictionary. And that's where we will start today's show, sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs, who can help you find the candidates you want to talk to for your small business faster at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL, where you can post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And James, let's get the bad news out of the way first. Amarius Mims going to miss a little bit of time with a pec strain. By the sounds of it, pretty minor injury, should be fine, should be back relatively soon. But what a bummer after the camp he's had that he's going to miss a couple of preseason games and the next few weeks of practices.
Yeah, it sucks. I'll say it like I said it before we started recording. It sucks. I'm not going to pull any punches here because Amarius Mims was playing really well. And you watch and then you go back, and I'm sure you did. And our good buddy Joe Goodberry put the cut up together, made it real easy. Every single play of Amarius Mims on Twitter. Boom. Watch every single play. And it's like, man, this dude, like, he might mess around and start. And I think the plan all along was to be able to bring him along slowly and let him learn and teach him. And then this happens. And I don't know when. It's really confusing because Amarius talked after the game, was smiling. The Bengals on Sunday posted a clip of Amarius talking afterwards. And it was because it was one heck of a debut. And that's what sucks is you got a taste of what Amarius Mims could bring to this offensive line room, to what he could bring to this passing game, to what he could bring to Joe Burrow in this offense. And what we saw in camp, what we saw in practice, translated to a game. Was it against backups? Sure, but it translated. Wasn't too bright for him. He knew what he was doing. He executed it. And so to have this, it might just be a little bump in the road. And that's how probably the Bengals are approaching it, how Amarius is approaching it. But it still sucks. So my instant reaction was surprise. And now that it set in a few hours ago when Zach sat up here and at Paycor Stadium and gave us the news, it sucks because I think he had a real shot to push for a starting job. And I'm not sure anyone realistically thought he would beat out Trent Brown before camp started. Even if you hoped he would, I'm not sure you expected it. And it was getting to that point where Zach Taylor even admitted today that he was going to get first team reps in practice, even with Trent back. And obviously that didn't happen because he's injured.
Yeah, I will give myself a small pat on the back that I thought after the draft pick, I thought he should compete for the starting job. I thought that would be a real competition, but it until Trent Brown showed up to camp not ready to go, it kind of felt like Trent Brown would have gotten those first team reps early in camp if he was ready to go, but he wasn't. And then Mims took those reps. He seized the opportunity. He ran with it, and he looked like the player that was ready to play in the NFL. He looked like you would hope a first-round tackle would look, and his physical tools are obviously sky's the limit kind of physical tools. So you're right. It is a huge bummer. The silver lining is that it is a minor injury. Zach wouldn't rule out Mims starting in week one, so I guess we shouldn't entirely rule that out either. This doesn't necessarily mean Trent Brown is your week one starter. This doesn't necessarily have significant down roster impacts, although we will discuss those and circle back to what's going on down roster on the offensive line a little bit later in the show. And the other nice thing about it is that Trent Brown is very experienced and you have a really good idea of who he is. And
Mhm.
while we would both, I think, like to have seen the Bengals make more moves in this offseason leading into training camp, bring in a few more solid veteran pieces to back up other key positions, like on the interior defensive line, perhaps on the interior offensive line, whatever you want to point out, cornerback maybe. They did on the offensive line. They double dipped in the offseason at right tackle with a premier draft pick, with a free agent that had starting capability, and now that is paying dividends. Hopefully, the lesson learned from this for the Bengals is, we could apply this to other positions. We could have signed Calais Campbell, and we feel way better about our defensive tackle room or whatever. But the good news is that the next guy up is Trent Brown. And you could feel a lot worse about that if it was another player instead of Trent Brown.
Sure. No doubt, because even after Saturday, if you would have interviewed me at like 11 a.m. before I came down to the stadium, I would have said Trent Brown was still the favorite. I would have. Now, I think it's close, but I think they're extremely comfortable with Trent Brown. And we can get to him and how he looked in practice today, his first team reps coming up in just a bit. But it's just losing Mims, even if it's for a little bit, is such a setback because of how he was rolling and how he was understanding things. But I will say this, I just praised him for how he played. And I think a lot of people, you included, share the same thought. But I asked him about that. Hey, how'd you think you played? And I tweeted out the video. It's on YouTube too. But he was like, there was a ton that I want to improve on. There were things, I'm sure a lot of people thought that I played well. And he was like, I need to work on my hand technique here, my hand placement. And he went into multiple different things. And also said that he thinks he can still get better and improve even when he's not practicing over these couple of weeks, just mentally understanding things, probably repping things out still. I mean, he can still move his feet. He can still do things like that. So I do think that there's hope that he's going to be able to continue to get better, because that's what you don't want. You don't want this injury to stunt his growth, because he was on such an upward trajectory and there was never really a bump in the road. And this is the first bump in the road, but it does feel like he has the right mindset and approach going into it, which is what you need if you're going to overcome this and not only overcome it for your career, but overcome it to have a productive rookie season.
Yeah, I wonder how much of a setback it will be, because the mindset is so, he talked about it at his locker. You were there. The perfectionism, the hand placement that he wants to work on, the sets that weren't perfect in his mind, that weren't exactly how he wanted them to be, and talking about past sets. He can work on those things with a pec injury, a relatively minor pec injury. He was out there watching today, but I wonder how quickly he will get onto the rehab field or will be able to do certain drills that he wants to work on to continue to hone his craft. And I think the mindset is great. That is something that Zach has praised, that Joe has praised, Joe Burrow has praised, that is, I think, pretty apparent anytime he's talked to you guys in the locker room. And so I do wonder just how significant it will be versus how much he'll be able to overcome this. Like I said, Zach wouldn't rule out him starting in week 1. How did Trent look today, though? Getting back to that topic, you teased it earlier. Trent Brown getting his first 11-on-11 team work in Bengals training camp on Monday. How'd that go?
It went well. I thought he looked pretty darn good. He looked strong. He looked hard to move. Obviously, he's not the fastest guy in the world, but was active as a run blocker. I saw him move multiple times across the line like you'd expect. And so I think it's a good first day. I really do. And they're taking it slow with him. I wouldn't anticipate him doing a ton tomorrow, especially if they plan on him getting, and I'm sure he will, especially now on Thursday against the Bears in that joint practice. Yeah, I think Trent checked off that box. Now, did he get beat a couple times? I'm pretty sure Osai got him at least once. I mean, a lot of people probably saw that. But he faced a lot of Myles Murphy, and I think Myles is like, man, I finally figure out Mims a bit, and I start having a little success against Mims, and now I got to deal with this bigger man who might not be as athletic as Amarius, but he's more experienced. So overall, I think Trent, big step in the right direction today. It's just a shame that it comes on a day when the Bengals lose Mims, because today would have been the competition, day 1, Jake, and we've been robbed of that at least a little bit.
Yeah, we won't get the direct competition, but of course the coaches can compare how Amarius Mims fared in his practice reps to how Trent and game reps to how Trent Brown performs over the next week or so. I do think that's a better matchup for Osai. I think Osai is primed to have a really good year rushing around guys who can't move as well as him. So from a matchup perspective, there's that. But we have a lot more to get to in this practice. A lot of players really stood out for the right reasons in that preseason game. And the next step for them was what would happen to the practice rotations. And they went about as well as I think you could have hoped for. So we will discuss the next steps for those players coming up next.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all of the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
James, let's get to some of that good news now. We got the Amarius Mims stuff out of the way, and a number of those players that we thought stood out for the right reasons in preseason game number one were elevated in their status in practice as well. And let's start, we'll just go down the list of rookies here to Germaine Burton, the Bengals' third-round pick at wide receiver, who had more opportunity in practice on Monday for the first time, I believe, in quite a while anyway. Not all offseason, but at least for training camp recently. He was catching passes from Joe Burrow in individual work and worked in with the twos and with the ones. Wasn't relegated to the later parts of practice in 11 on 11, waiting for passes from, down roster quarterbacks, primarily Logan Woodside he was working with. So while there were some receivers absent today, and we can talk about the nuance here, they could still have him working with Logan Woodside if that was their intent. But they instead elevated him a little bit. He got to work with quarterbacks who were definitely going to be on the roster this year for the Bengals, and he was rewarded for his late game efforts with some earlier practice snaps.
He did, or he was, and he caught a touchdown from Joe Burrow in team drills. First one, I believe, in team drills. So there is a first. I tweeted out that clip, and it's good to see. I don't know that it changes the depth chart a ton. We know Charlie Jones is out, avoided serious injury, but is week to week. Trent Irwin didn't practice today, and T. Higgins was limited. And yet, at the same time, to your point, it's relevant because they still need guys to catch passes from Logan Woodside. They could have just bumped him up slightly and kept him with Jake Browning, which he took plenty of reps with Jake Browning. But, guys like Kendrick Pryor and Shedrick Jackson, Andre Yosavash, those guys were still practicing with Joe Burrow. And yet they found, and they have been throughout camp, by the way, but today they found time for Burton as well. And I think that is noteworthy, to your point. And in catching passes from Joe, trying to get on the same page as Joe, that's huge because Burton does something that really no one else outside of Jamar does. And you could include T, but he wins a different way. But that downfield ability, like even if that's all he brings to you this year, like you take it all day long. So it was good to see that. I do think, though, does it continue? It's how does Germaine respond? And I do think, by the way, post-game Saturday, he was really focused on proving himself. And so this was a step in the right direction. And obviously he'll have Tuesday's practice, but then that joint practice in this upcoming preseason game. Those are two opportunities for Germaine to keep going, keep stacking, and get closer and closer to this rotation, which I do think it will be a rotation at wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I guess I'll ask you this question then. That's a good segue because people were asking on Twitter about this. How much do you think wide receiver 3 is a real competition right now? Because to me, it still feels like Yosavash is head and shoulders ahead of the competitors for that job. He continues to be the guy working in the slot with the first team. Before we were talking on the show today, you talked about Burrow's trust in Yosavash, which I'll let you speak to as well. But with Charlie Jones' injury being less severe than we feared, the week-to-week status on the bang knee, and the slow but surely we're seeing an elevation here for Germaine Burton after preseason game number 1. If that continues, we've talked all offseason about a rotation coming here, and we weren't necessarily even anticipating Josevich being part of that. What's your feel on that situation now?
Well, I think Yoshi is obviously going to get a ton of playing time, but Trent Irwin started on Saturday. And Trent Irwin is going to be a big part of it. And so do I think Andre is the favorite or the guy who's going to get the most snaps? I don't even know if he's going to start because it could be Irwin. But get the most snaps in that rotation? Absolutely. But I do think it's going to be a rotation. I don't think that Irwin is just completely cast aside. And that's before we get to a Charlie Jones or a Jermaine Burton. And what I think Burton, his opportunity or his chance is to show, hey, you got to find a way to get me on the field. It might be 20% of the snaps, but you got to find a way. Maybe it means move Jamar inside and put him in the slot, but you have to find a way. And that's what I think some of these young guys that we're talking about, when they go out there and do what they did on Saturday night, the coaches give them another look. And that was fun to me today because the ins and outs of training camp, the day in, day out. Before the game, we kind of saw the same rotations for quite some time. And to see the mix today, to see the reaction today, I think it's big. We can continue with my guy Dax Hill, who got a ton of reps guarding T. Higgins, and T. Higgins climbed the ladder on him in the end zone, was able to catch a ball that Dax knocked away probably a half second too late from it being an incomplete.
T did call it a drop in the locker room. So that's interesting.
It is interesting, right? But it's really close. I think it would have been ruled a touchdown. Anyways, Andre Josevich, he had a pass breakup there on him, but he was getting reps with Cam Taylor-Britt and Mike Hilton, with the number ones, and with Geno Stone. And it's like, all right, well, let's give it a second look. And a lot of guys can change the way they're viewed if they follow up Saturday with a good day today. I thought Dax was good today. I thought Jermaine was too. But again, that's my naked eye and not the coaching staff. But then you follow it up with this week. This week is pretty darn big, I think, for a lot of these guys that we're discussing.
Yeah. Up and down the roster too. Like we're talking about guys trying to crack rotational roles or starting positions. It's also relevant down the roster. We're not going to get to all those guys today, but certainly relevant for those guys fighting for roster spots, trying to show that they can be special teams contributors, whatever it is. I will say that there's one play. It was a Cedric Jackson touchdown on a blown coverage. That might have been on Dax. I believe it probably was on Dax. It looked like Mike Hilton was passing off Kendrick Pryor to the next guy in the zone. Dax kind of followed his guy over the middle. Maybe that's just a structural problem with the coverage. Maybe Mike Hilton did make a mistake there. They were talking after the play. You could see them walking back and resetting and having a conversation after the play. But outside of that, there were also those stronger plays for Dax where he's like in a great position, contesting T. Higgins, who's just going to beat some corner sometimes, high pointing a ball. He's very good at that, obviously. And the pass breakup on Yoshi. He does need to capitalize on this week, though. He needs to maintain that performance and needs to carry into the next game. Today could have, for all we know, been, okay, Dax, you had a great game. We'll give you an opportunity with the ones today, but we're still going to rotate. I would expect them to continue to rotate DJ Turner and Dax Hill as they try to work that out.
Oh, I think the competition is – I think the competition is far from over. I think it's – Dax played his way back into the conversation. And the conversation had kind of ended for a lot of people.
It looks pretty over. It really did. And then now it's like a huge week to see, does this actually continue into the third week of the preseason?
But that's the beauty of games, is they just have a ton of weight and in joint practices. And when it matters, like practice, of course you want to see it in practice all the time, but their second best player hasn't practiced all camp and no one in the building seems that worried, right? Practice is still practice. And so, yeah, hopefully we see both of these guys. And Turner had a near interception with the second team today where he reached out, almost had it, was going up against Cole Burgess deep downfield, and it would have been a super athletic play. And it went through his hands deep downfield. It would have been a hard catch, but almost had it.
We'll continue the conversation with other guys earning more practice opportunities with some great news on Matt Lee, which excites these podcasters, I would say. and what's going on with the tackle rotations as the Bengals try to sort out their backups on the offensive line. We'll finish the show there coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process easier, quicker. Use LinkedIn Jobs, where 2.5 million small businesses have relied on LinkedIn. You can too. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Matt Lee, 7th round center. Couldn't be more excited. Let's go. Working his way into the rotation with the twos, getting snaps at center with the second team after he put together a very admirable performance. Was just as you would expect him to be to finish that game against Tampa, James. And boy, do I hope we see him with the twos this week. Get him that opportunity against a higher level of competition. Find out if he can be your center of the, well, let's not get to center of the future. Backup center this year. Let me be hype. Come on. Very exciting stuff for Matt Lee.
For sure. And he looked good. He looked good. Looked like he belonged. There were no obvious losses or a false start penalty or holding penalty, 79, 15. Oh, wait. I'm just kidding. Man, catching strays. More on 79.
We're going to get there, too. It's not even that stray.
No, it's not. It was a tease. I turned it into a tease as I poke fun at that because, good Lord. 4 of 8 penalties, by the way, on 79. But Matt Lee really looks the part. Really good anchor for his size today, running with the twos. Like, I didn't notice him getting run over or pushed over. And you could say, oh, well, the Bengals defensive tackles, whatever. He's still playing NFL guys. Like, that matters when you're advancing. I mean, you were here. You didn't really see him in team drills much at all when you were here. And so for him to move up today, it's exactly what we thought could happen. And Trey Hill played guard. And that's Trey Hill's path, is to be good enough at guard that it really forces their hand. And Matt Lee's path is to be clearly head and shoulders better than Trey Hill at center. And I think a lot of people would have looked at what happened on Saturday night and said that, yes, he was. But again, and it's a theme here, whether it's Burton, whether it's Dax, it doesn't matter. You got to go do it again. And so this is a big week. Today was a big day for him. And hopefully it can continue, because you're right. Hitting on a 7th rounder like that could be your backup center and be someone that you could potentially rely on. You would take that all day long.
Yeah. And not only do they have to continue and carry it into another week from a consistency perspective, you also have to see him do it against a higher level of competition and see these guys do it against a higher level of competition instead of guys that we don't think are going to be on NFL rosters. And great to build that confidence and build those first steps and earn that opportunity to go show you can do it and be like, okay, yeah, those guys were clearly head and shoulders ahead of their competition in that game. And we're very good in that game, but now you got to go do it against guys that are going to stick on NFL rosters, or at least practice squads, right? Like players that are going to stick around in the NFL and see some playing time. And that is the big next step there. And then they have questions along the offensive line that they're trying to answer today as well. So say Matt Lee wins your backup center job. You got Trent Brown and Amarius Mims for your starting and backup tackle positions. Either way, you've got a swing tackle there built in with those guys. And then you're trying to figure out the other 1 or 2 guys they want to keep on the offensive line, probably 2 if they could have it their way.
Yep. And
there were some other changes, James, today with that second team offensive line rotation after Jackson Carman had a very, what's the word I want to use here? Let's just call it unfortunate game against Tampa to start his preseason.
Holding 79 offense. He just got caught. Did you hear that?
Yeah,
that's kind of how the officials said. Holding 79 offense. There's two. All right, I'm not going to go through it and bore you guys to death. But yes, it dropped down the order, and he should. He should. Honestly, if they trotted him out there, can't do it, because you look at it now. The third right tackle is probably playing against the Bears on Saturday as the starter, right? In fact, he is. I can say that he is, and so, like that's a tough position to be in, right? And that being said, they tried Cody Ford out at right tackle, and then they went with Jackson Kirkland at left tackle. And as you were describing that, you were like, all right, well, they'll probably keep two more, right? You keep the starting five plus Amarius Mims. We'll just put him on the outside looking in right now. And then after that, let's say it's Matt Lee. Well, then who are your other two? I think Cody Ford is a lock, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think as of today, I would say Jackson Kirkland. Because if he gives them some kind of tackle flex in the ability to play guard, just a little bit of tackle flex.
Because he would be their fourth, fifth tackle, because it would be your two starters. Then it would be whichever of Amarius and Trent. Then it would probably be Cody Ford, I think. And then your fifth guy would be, and then maybe you can live with that.
No doubt. And he's your backup, one of your backup guards. Mm-hmm. So he's serving as a multi-purpose player there if you need him. And who knows if they're all, I'm not saying they're all going to be active, but, at 8 is usually the number. But that's kind of the path. And what Trey Hill needs to do is show that he's a better guard than Jackson Kirkland. I think that's kind of where we're at. And if you're Carman, you just got to show that you're just better. Like, it is an uphill battle right now. I'm not saying it's impossible, but by God, you better have a couple of weeks, a couple of really great weeks.
I am so sick of it.
I'm not saying you, right? Like I get it, but I mean, we didn't think he was good when they picked him. You could go back and listen back then. I don't think we were on YouTube yet, but you could go back and listen, and that was being said. So yeah, I mean, and even then he's been underwhelming for where my expectations were. And then to come in as a fourth year player, not stand out at all. It's a contract year, by the way. Like Osai is in the same position, where he's got a lot to prove. He's got some physical traits, hasn't stayed healthy. Like Carman, it's not the health issue. It's just been a motivation issue, clearly. And there are other guys that are trying to make this team that I think are motivated. And whether it's interior guys, whether it's guys like Cody Ford and Jackson Kirkland or others, Deontay Smith, I think there are a lot of guys trying to make this team.
Deontay Smith remains injured. Is that correct? Yep. So that is why
he's ramping up. He's ramping up a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I think he's on the outside look again right now for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he just can't stay healthy throughout his NFL career. It's been the issue. What about guys down roster? Are we going to see more opportunities for Devin Cochran? Is he going to get any work at guard? I wonder. He's maybe a little bit too big, too upright to play inside, but had an admirable game in preseason game number 1. He's been with the team for a while now, and he's been kicking around since 2022. I don't know. I'm grasping at straws here.
Real quick to cut you. Smith did do individual drills today.
Oh, great.
So he didn't do team, but he is progressing. He was limited in practice.
So there's a step in the right direction, but trying to find that last guy on the offensive line might take some time. Maybe it is Jackson Kirkland. He's a guy they like a lot. Yep. I think he needs to play better. I still have the same reservations there that I had before. He was a really good player until he had all those injuries in college. Like, this was a guy that could have been a day 1, day 2 pick, probably day 2 pick, before his knee injuries really robbed him of a lot of his movement ability, to the point where we're now talking about him as guard with, some backup tackle flex. But you would like to see one of those guys emerge. Mm-hmm. I do think that I feel a little bit better about their depth still than I have in years past. If Matt Lee can be a true good backup center, if Cody Ford can be a backup at multiple positions, just because Amarius Mims and Trent Brown give them depth at tackle they haven't had in the past. But Amarius Mims suffering an injury when he did, Trent Brown's history still gives you a little bit of nerves there. And so it's just going back to what I said earlier, where they made the move for Trent Brown, if they would have also made the move for, the Dalton Risner type of interior lineman, well, we're probably not having this conversation and wringing our hands over who's that last lineman going to be, because we would know who it would be because they spent the money on the veteran.
Yeah, I think it's going to be easy to say that a couple times, right? And you just hope that the guys that they're banking on get healthy. If Mims is healthy, then we don't think about. I mean, there's a scenario where you could have argued sign Becton too. Who's playing guard for the Eagles right now.
Mm-hmm.
You bring in Mekhi Becton, didn't work out visit wise, and a few days later Trent Brown signed. But could you imagine if they had signed Becton, Brown, and then drafted Mims? I mean, it's a lot of beef. And he went to the Eagles for like $3 or $4 million. Like, it was similar to the Trent Brown deal. So I think a little more than Trent Brown, but point is the point. And so it is worth noting, though, that I do feel better about tackle than I have in years past because they're just better.
Yeah.
Orlando Brown Jr. is better than what they had in Jonah. And Trent Brown is better than what they had in Jonah for this offense. And Amarius Mims has a chance to be the best of the three. And that's pretty reasonable. And even though I think Jonah was better than a lot of people think in Cincinnati, he's certainly not as physically as imposing or as dominant as these three dudes. Probably
a better stylistic fit too, right? For the kind of drop back passing offense the Bengals want to run. We'll have some down roster thoughts. Perhaps we didn't get to the punters yet. We've got to get back to that punter battle and any other practice takeaways for you tomorrow before the Bengals travel up to Chicago on Wednesday. Thanks for making Locked On Bengals your first listen today. You can go check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast if you need a second listen and you want to stay on the football train and on the Locked On network. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. However, until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.